the previous video, we have discussed in considerable detail what was the primary reason behind the outbreak of the American War of Independence. We also discussed how this revolution reached a state of stalemate where the British troops and the colonist militias were involved in a tussle. After the British Parliament declared that this was a formal and official rebellion of the colonies against the British Crown, the Second Continental Congress was labelled as something rebellious. It was a formal rebellion. But what did this Congress decide to do? Did it want to be restricted to the label of being a rebellious body? Definitely not. What did the Congress do? The Congress instead chose to become an independent and unofficial government of the 13 rebellious colonies. That is to say, after this declaration, the Second Continental Congress became an unofficial rebel government of the 13 colonies. What happened after this? This finally meant that the Congress was trying to break free of the shackles of British colonial rule. The Congress finally declared itself an independent body and tried to sever all ties with the British power. Now, what was the function of the Congress? This unofficial government of the 13 colonies now started appointing its own people. It made its own decisions along with passing certain laws. That is to say, this Congress of the 13 rebellious colonies now became an independent body that existed irrespective of British colonial rule. Now, what did this Congress do? How was Congress organizing its troops? What were the functions of this Congress? That brings us to the discussion we have already had in the previous video. We talked about how the militias were unorganized armies. What does that mean? That means that these unorganized armies were very bold and responsive, but they lacked a coherent structure. They lacked any sort of unity, any sort of organization. To have any kind of army, it is very important, it is very crucial to have proper organization. What did the Congress do in this regard? The Congress unified, trained and grouped all these colonist militia troops into one combined army. Now, do you know what this combined army was called? This combined army was called the Continental Army. So now came into being the Continental Army, that was the combined army of these 13 colonies. It was the responsibility of this combined army or this Continental Army to defend these territories along with fighting for independence from British rule. This brings us to a very important point. Can you think an army can exist without a leader? What will happen to an army if there is no leader to give it a sense of purpose and direction? This was also the case of the Continental Army. Though the Congress brought together all the militia troops and formed the Continental Army, it lacked one head. It was at this point that the colonists realized that they should have a leader who would not just lead the armies, but a leader who would lead the American Revolution itself, who would give shape to the American Revolution, who would steer ahead this revolution into bringing independence for the colonists. Now, who do you think was appointed as the head? The Congress appointed George Washington as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. But who was George Washington? George Washington was a prominent military hero and a colonist statesman. He was very popular among the colonists. People knew him, and with time it was not just the soldiers but also the colonial settlers started looking up to him as their leader, as the man who would help them win independence from British colonial rule. We just discussed that this Congress brought together this Continental Army and gave it a formal shape under the leadership of George Washington. Now, another very important thing that this Congress did was the Declaration of Independence. What was this Declaration of Independence? At a Congress session in Philadelphia on the 4th of July 1776, the settlers of these 13 colonies adopted the Declaration of Independence. What did this Declaration of Independence mean? This meant that the 13 colonies were now independent from British colonial rule. These were now independent states of America. While we talk about the Declaration of Independence, one thing we should definitely focus on is that with this declaration, these colonies finally broke away all ties with the British government. That is to say, these are now independent territorial units. They are no longer British colonies in North America. These are independent states. The Declaration of Independence has been a very important part of the chronicles of history, and it is for this reason that this deserves our attention and discussion. If I now ask you, when was the American Declaration of Independence adopted, will you be able to answer? Was it on the 4th of October 1776, or the 4th of July 1776, or the 4th of June 1776, or the 4th of September 1776? What would be your answer? Yes, you are right. The American Declaration of Independence was adopted on the 4th of July 1776. We just discussed that this American Declaration of Independence brought independence to these American colonies. It will be wrong to call them colonies any longer because these were erstwhile colonies. These are no longer British colonies in North America. The Declaration of Independence stated that the 13 colonies that were waging war with Britain would now be considered as independent states. But that brings us to a new question. Formerly they were called the 13 colonies of Britain. How did this become the 13 states of USA? How did these united colonies suddenly become the United States of America? You can see here that these are now the 13 states of USA. How did this become? While the Declaration of Independence meant independence for these 13 warring colonies, these colonies also decided to do something. What did they decide to do? Without giving up their autonomy or without giving up their independence completely, these states also decided to come together to form the United States of America. So, the former 13 colonies now decided to become the 13 independent states and organize themselves as the United States of America. We have already discussed that this United States of America had broke away all sorts of ties with Britain. Now, what was this United States of America? This is the moment of the birth of the nation that we know as the United States of America. It is an independent, autonomous political unit. It is an independent territorial unit that has its own government, its own administration. This means that the United States of America was no longer under the British colonial rule. Now, you might question who proposed this Declaration of Independence? Whose ideas were these to think of this sort of an arrangement for the United States of America? It was the American statesman by the name of Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence. So, it was Thomas Jefferson who wrote the American Declaration of Independence. You should also know that eventually this man became the third president of this independent nation. The Declaration of Independence was primarily authored by Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson stated that all individuals are equal, and as equal citizens they have the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to the pursuit of happiness. So all these citizens were supposed to be treated equally in the eyes of law. He borrowed these ideas from the Enlightenment thinker John Locke and his concept of natural rights. Now, what are natural rights? An individual, simply by the virtue of being born, is born with certain rights. These rights are not given to an individual, and so these rights cannot be taken away from them. No government can forcefully take away these rights. All governments are meant to protect the natural rights of an individual, and if any government fails to do so, people can throw away such governments and bring in their place new governments. These were the ideas that Jefferson stated in the American Declaration of Independence. This Declaration of Independence was a momentous thing in its own right. It stated many universal things, universal rights and liberties. For example, the right to life, the right to speech, the right to liberty. So this transcended from being a mere revolution to getting to an universal height. We just discussed what this Declaration of Independence stated. Along with stating the birth of the United States of America as an independent nation, it also stated certain universal things. What are these universal things? It stated the rights of the citizens. What are the rights that this Declaration of Independence stated? It stated the right to speech, the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to form government. That is to say, these rights could be exercised by the people of this nation. This nation would no longer be under the colonial rule of British power or any other power. Now, would you not like to know who were these people who played a major role in drafting and creating this Declaration of Independence? Whose brainchild was this Declaration of Independence? That brings us to this point that the members of the Congress that we already talked about, adopted the Declaration of Independence on the 4th of July 1776. And the people who played a major role in the adoption of this Declaration of Independence were known as the founding fathers of the nation. They were the founding fathers of the United States of America. Not restricted to this list, but few of the founding fathers were Thomas Jefferson, as we have already seen, George Washington, and Benjamin Franklin. In this video, we could discuss how important the Declaration of Independence was in birthing the nation that is the United States of America. Prior to the Declaration of Independence, this was a mere revolution for the independence of one nation. The colonists, the revolutionaries, were fighting to gain independence from colonial rule. But after this Declaration of Independence was stated, this reached a new height. Why is it so? This Declaration of Independence stated certain universal things. Universal things as in universal liberties and rights that have been inspiring generations and generations and have also shaped the ideals of many modern nations. Be that the right to life, the right to speech, the right to liberty, these are very crucial in giving any country, any independent nation a formal shape. In giving the citizens of any independent nation the rights and the liberties they deserve. It is for this reason that the Declaration of Independence is an extremely crucial document, not just for America, but for many other nations that have found their independence post this event. The original document of this Declaration of Independence, as we have been discussing all this while, is kept in the National Archives Museum of Washington. In this video, we could discuss the importance of the Declaration of Independence. But to delve deeper into the American War of Independence, we also have to see what happened after independence was declared on the part of these former colonists, or what happened after these colonies became independent states. It is this thing that we will take up in our next video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers, or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million-plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.